My dear friends, when we celebrate the sacred mysteries, we're not alone. We have all the centuries behind us. We have all eternity before us. We have all the saints around us. We have the angels in our midst. And on this day, I'd like to invite you to come just for a few seconds into our past, where we stand here, to remember that what we do easily was done at a price, not that long ago in history. As you know, Ireland was a thorn in the flesh for the English crown. Alas, they couldn't stamp out this papish practice. They tried as hard as they possibly could, often with economic means, but it didn't work. Just accompany me for a typical event in the 1600s. In a manuscript written in Dublin in 1630, which is preserved in the British Museum, a certain Father Nicholas, who was a Capuchin, who was then resident in Bridge Street in Dublin, gives us many interesting details of the course of events at this time. A proclamation commanded that none of the regulars, so they're aiming at Franciscans and Jesuits and the like, should preach. I wonder if they came back in our day, would they have reason to fear? Preaching should be something that upsets people. Nowadays, if one says anything a bit out of line, one is corrected, ultimately by a bishop actually, because the people complain. Yet, on the sacred night of Christmas, a certain Father Thomas, who was superior of the Franciscan community, made some little speech, so a sermon in disguise, to the people. News hereof being brought to the state, they, holding it for an affront and contempt, caused the first eruption to be made upon the Franciscans' residence. It was in Cook Street. It was a small house which served them for oratory and convent. Into this house on the following day, about noon, was sent a motley crowd, acting on instructions from the Lord's justices. Still smarting at the thought of the little speech of the Franciscan, these godly men, while at Protestant service in Christchurch, notice our Christchurch, received the additional information that High Mass was being celebrated in the friars' oratory. So that obviously they were deep in prayer, weren't they? At once, says Hamon Lestrange, a contemporary authority, they sent the Archbishop of Dublin, no less, the mayor, sheriffs, and recorder of the city, with a file of musketeers to apprehend them. The priests engaged in their function, which they did, taking away the crucifixes and paraments of the altar. The soldiers, having cut down the image of St. Francis, the priests and friars were delivered into the hands of the pursuivants. So, there's another account of it given by Father Nicholas Archibald, and he says, the Mayor Forster, with the Protestant Dublin Archbishop and armed soldiers, entered upon the Franciscans as they were at Mass, breaking up their doors, pulling down their images, and trampling them underfoot. By the way, just beside you there, you've got a picture of somebody who was caught in the act. It's St. John Roberts. He was a Welshman from our area in North Wales, a convert because he was an Anglican. He became a Catholic at Notre Dame. He studied at Oxford, but he was apprehended while celebrating. It was actually at the last gospel, and there was a bang on the door. Open up in the name of the king. So they bashed the door down, and of course you can't interrupt once you start, and he carried on and was caught. And within a matter of days, I believe, he was hanged, drawn and quartered at Tyburn, the very same Tyburn tree, as they called it, as our local saint, Oliver Plunkett. So, as they were saying, the Holy Mass, and they make violence on the altar. So these are acting in the name of Christ, apparently. We've got an archbishop in the midst of them. They strip it and carry away the ornaments. They cast hand upon two young religious men whom they met bluntly with. Now, look what happens here. The people actually stand up and don't let themselves be bullied. It's quite interesting what happens, because actually you have the feminine sex making great nuisance of themselves with authorities here, a lesson unto us. So stunned were the people at this sudden incursion and wholesale destruction that, he says, none of the assistants at Mass made any resistance. But he at once proceeds to describe the part played by a certain matron, whom he calls the widow Nugent. Not forbearing any longer the spirit of zeal and indignation which mounted up in her heart, transpierced with fire of zeal, like another Mattathias in the Maccabees, she raised the cry. She flings herself on the soldiers. The rest of the viragos and maidens join with her. They strike, they shoulder, they catch, they scratch, thump and tread underfoot whomsoever they lay hands on, so that the mayor, bishop, and soldiers were glad to hasten out of doors. They were met, as they fled through the streets, with a shower of stones, cast upon them by women, boys, prentices, and country clowns, who that day came to the town, not for any such end, but notice, to go to St. Stephen's Well. It's the one thing that doesn't die quite so easily in the popular mind, wells and pilgrimages. You've seen it in Wales. Then the Capuchin historian adds, with a delightful simplicity and quaintness, it seemeth the saint would be revenged on them. One of the soldiers was so tumbled, tossed, collocated in the mire, that he hardly escaped death. And on it goes. It's basically a scene of utter attrition and ultimate failure by the British authorities. They can't stamp it out. And now Ireland itself, from within, is doing perfectly well what they couldn't do from without. Now, it's not just ascribable to human and social ends and means. It's actually quite Luciferian. We know that Satan wanted this last crown in his jewel. I heard on the grapevine, actually, that afterwards he was going to go to get Poland. He has succeeded very well in the Emerald Isle. Now, there's one thing I want you to be aware of on this day of Corpus Christi. It's this, that there are two levels. One is the social breakup and breakdown. The other is actually more subtle, because there are quite a few things which carry on as regards the visibility of the faith. The structure actually is still in place. Still, over the Emerald Isle, the churches are open. Still, one is able to find pretty well everywhere, on a daily basis, the Holy Sacrifice. Now, actually, there's quite a lot of adoration in most churches throughout the land. Still, one has the kind of carpet bombing effect of having each church with the school next to it, more or less. Therefore, the class is receiving the sacraments en masse when it comes to First Communion and confirmation, confession, obviously. So the structure still carries on. But, and this is a big but, if one were to be an angel and to know things with another vision, one will perhaps be seeing a different panorama, very different indeed from the visible one. I mean a scenario in which perhaps the majority, that's frightening to say, the majority of Holy Communions received are actually not short of sacrilegious. Now that's a cancer. That's the inner life of the Church eaten up when we're using, as it were, divine grace and abusing it at the same time. When we're celebrating God but disobeying God and hurting God. It's not worship in spirit and in truth, as the Lord wanted, with insistence. We're doing our own thing. And the body of Christ has become part of something far more important, honouring